Everyone in the music hall suddenly froze. The janitor, a black old man named Benjamin, had just lightly touched the grand piano, an instrument reserved only for the most prestigious artists. A cold wave of laughter echoed, led by Charlotte Whitmore, a young musical prodigy, wealthy and famous for mocking anyone she deemed beneath her. But just moments later, as Benjamin gently sat down and began to play, the entire hall fell into a breathless silence. Eyes wide open, mouths agape, every gaze was fixed on him. What happened next not only left everyone in the hall speechless, but also revealed a shocking secret no one could have foreseen. It was the annual prestigious Music Gala of America, a gathering of young musical geniuses, elite artists, renowned critics, and the wealthiest nobility from the Southeast region. Luxury limousines lined up outside the theater, doors opening to reveal well-dressed gentlemen in tailored suits and ladies in glamorous, extravagant evening gowns, stepping out to the admiring and awestruck looks of those standing around. Inside the grand hall, hundreds of red velvet seats were neatly arranged, each ticket costing hundreds of dollars, reserved for the most special guests. Wealthy sponsors, influential music judges, and sharp critics from all over the country had settled in, eagerly awaiting the grand opening of the event. The stage was brightly lit by professional lighting, with a magnificent Steinway grand piano gleaming in the center, its black surface like a mirror, symbolizing an invisible power reserved only for top-tier artists to perform on. It was not just an instrument, but a symbol of perfection, fame, and status, something every young piano artist dreamed of touching, blending into the most exquisite and perfect notes to solidify their place in the music world. Behind the curtains, the young musical prodigies in their tuxedos and glittering gowns were hurriedly preparing. Some were practicing for the last time, nervous and excited, while others stood in small groups, conversing with an air of arrogance or discreetly sizing up their competition. Among these bright faces, the most notable was Charlotte Whitmore, a talented young star, the only daughter of a famous tech billionaire from Charleston. With her golden hair, porcelain skin, and a sophisticated blue evening gown, she looked like a proud angel, standing aloof, seemingly indifferent to anyone else in the room. Charlotte knew full well that every eye was on her, and that only made her more confident, her lips curling into a subtle, arrogant smile. No one noticed, however, that in the shadows behind the stage, an elderly black man was quietly pushing his cleaning cart, silently completing his work as he did every day. Benjamin Davis, the aging janitor in his faded gray uniform, with a thoughtful gaze and weary steps, was gently performing the final cleaning task before the gala began. Amidst the proud, bustling atmosphere, no one in the room acknowledged Benjamin's presence. To them, he was simply an invisible shadow, a figure who didn't deserve attention in this glamorous and prestigious event. But everything that was about to unfold on this fateful night would silence the entire grand hall in astonishment and shatter every prejudice and arrogance in an instant. This would not just be any ordinary concert night. It would become a defining moment, leaving an unforgettable lesson in the hearts of everyone present about the true value of a person. Amid the luxurious atmosphere of the gala, all eyes backstage discreetly turned to Charlotte Whitmore, the 17-year-old white girl who stood out like a flawless gem, exuding the charm of an angel, yet with an unmistakable air of coldness and arrogance. Born into a family of billionaires, the only daughter of Jonathan Whitmore, the most powerful tech mogul in Charleston, Charlotte had grown up surrounded by influence and privilege. Her life was constantly immersed in luxury, high society parties, and endless admiration from all sides. But what made Charlotte the center of attention was not just her wealthy background, but also her extraordinary piano talent. At just 17 years old, Charlotte Whitmore had won 5 state-level music awards and had even performed on the prestigious Carnegie Hall stage in New York, earning admiration from renowned music critics. Her classical sonatas, played with such precision and mastery, seemed flawless, note for note. She played the piano with an almost unbelievable technical perfection, making anyone who had witnessed her performance acknowledge that they were watching a future star, a new legend in the classical music world. But this very perfection had shaped Charlotte into a proud, almost arrogant individual. Her piercing blue eyes always carried a detached, indifferent gaze when looking at those around her. Charlotte was well aware of her value and never hid her disdain for anyone she considered beneath her. She had no qualms about making sharp, sometimes cruel remarks to mock her friends and even her competitors. Her overwhelming confidence had gradually isolated her within her own world, a perfect world she believed no one could ever reach. As she stood backstage, preparing to step onto the stage tonight, Charlotte exuded absolute confidence. She wore an extravagant blue evening gown, custom designed by a top Italian fashion house, which accentuated her regal and elegant appearance. Her golden hair was meticulously styled, shimmering under the lights. Charlotte was mentally rehearsing every note of the concerto she would perform, her long fingers moving gracefully in the air with perfect precision. "Charlotte?" a timid voice called from beside her, causing Charlotte to frown. It was Emily Brooks, her peer and also a contestant in the competition tonight. Emily always felt nervous when standing near Charlotte, her voice softening, her gaze lowered in avoidance. "What concerto are you playing tonight?" Emily gently asked, trying to strike up a friendly conversation. Charlotte looked Emily up and down, her lips curling into a half-smile of cold disdain. "Why are you asking this? Are you trying to mimic me, or are you just curious to know why you're going to fail?" Emily froze, her face turning bright red as she stammered, "No, I was just curious." Charlotte casually adjusted the hem of her gown, offering a faint, dismissive smile. "Focus on your mediocre performance, Emily. Don't try to get close to me to make yourself feel important. We're not the same." Emily remained silent, lowering her head as she walked away, her shoulders trembling slightly from the hurt and embarrassment. The people around them went quiet, avoiding Charlotte's gaze. It seemed that everyone recognized that standing next to Charlotte only made them targets for her cruel mockery. But no one dared to speak up. They all understood that a single word from Charlotte Whitmore could get them excluded from prestigious concerts, robbing them of precious performance opportunities, and possibly even ruining their music careers. Charlotte looked around backstage, letting out a sigh of boredom and sarcasm. None of these people are worthy opponents tonight. Her gaze lingered briefly on the stage where the shiny Steinway piano awaited her. That was the only place worthy of her, a stage reserved for true musical geniuses. What Charlotte didn't know was that tonight would be a turning point in her life. Her arrogance was about to face a major lesson, as the person she looked down on the most would be the one to shatter her cold, perfect world and teach her a lesson she would never forget. About the true value of talent and compassion, things no one had dared to point out to her before. While Charlotte Whitmore was still immersed in thoughts about the concerto she would perform, just a few steps away, an elderly black man with a quiet and humble demeanor was diligently going about his work in the shadows backstage. It was Benjamin Davis, the janitor of the Charleston Grand Theater, a man whose existence had never truly been acknowledged by anyone over the years. Benjamin Davis, now in his 60s, had a face etched with the wrinkles of time and the mixed joys and sorrows of life's experiences. His deep black eyes always carried a calmness and patience, like a deep, still lake, but also hinted at an indescribable sorrow. His short hair, nearly entirely white, was always neatly kept under an old cap. The light gray janitor's uniform he wore was worn in places, but always clean and tidy, reflecting his meticulous and careful nature. Benjamin was not a man of many words. His few colleagues backstage knew him only as a polite, courteous, and discreet individual. He always silently went about his work, quietly cleaning and never causing any disturbance or bothering anyone. He would always appear at the end of the day, when the artists and guests had left, to silently clean the chairs, the stage, and even the overlooked corners. However, tonight was an exception. Benjamin had been asked to come in earlier than usual to prepare for the upcoming prestigious concert. He carefully pushed his old cleaning cart deeper into the backstage area. The soft sound of the wheels on the stone floor blended into the hustle and bustle of the conversations, hurried footsteps, and the sound of instruments practicing echoing from every corner of the backstage. Benjamin paused next to the grand stage, just near the shining Steinway piano, an item regarded as the theater's most precious treasure. His gaze shifted to the piano with a look of respect and a hint of nostalgia. His wrinkled, slender hand reached out unconsciously, gently grazing the polished surface of the piano, moving over it naturally. In that moment, a feeling of both familiarity and strangeness filled his heart. Just one light touch, but it seemed to awaken deep memories, both painful and joyful, that had long been buried inside him. His eyes briefly glistened with emotion, as if he had just met an old friend he hadn't seen in years. But in that fleeting instant, a cold voice pierced through Benjamin's emotions like a knife. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Benjamin startled, quickly pulling his hand back. He turned around, his eyes meeting the cold, arrogant gaze of Charlotte Whitmore. The young girl was approaching him with an angry, contemptuous expression, her lips tightly pressed together and her eyes sharp, as if trying to pierce through him. "That piano is not something you can just touch," Charlotte shouted, her voice ringing out clearly, deliberately drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Immediately, the backstage atmosphere grew tense. All eyes turned toward Benjamin, forming looks of judgment and disdain. The other young artists and stagehands began whispering among themselves with clear discomfort, some even frowning, eyeing Benjamin as if he had just committed a serious mistake. Benjamin was flustered, his hands trembling slightly as he quickly lowered his head in a gentle apology. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I just wanted to check if the piano was polished carefully." But Charlotte had no intention of letting him off so easily. She continued in a biting tone. "Who do you think you are, checking this precious piano? Your job is to clean, to mop the floors, not to dream of being a pianist. Know your place, Mr. Davis." A few of Charlotte's friends chuckled lightly, their eyes still full of contempt as they looked at the poor old janitor. One even pulled out a phone, recording the scene as if it were the most amusing thing they'd seen. Benjamin felt his heart ache. Though he had long grown accustomed to the indifferent, sometimes subtly dismissive glances from others over the years, the cruel words and public mockery from someone as young as Charlotte still stung deeply. In that moment, all the bitter memories of his life seemed to come rushing back, making him feel heavier and more powerless than ever before. Benjamin didn't say another word. He merely lowered his head once more, hurriedly turning and walking away, pushing his cleaning cart back into the dark corner of the backstage. The sound of the old wheels echoed faintly in the tense silence. As Benjamin disappeared from the sight of everyone, Charlotte tossed her hair arrogantly, a smug smile on her lips as she turned to her friends, speaking in a clearly contemptuous tone. "Unbelievable. Everyone thinks they have the right to touch other people's things." Everyone laughed along with Charlotte, But no one realized that in that moment they had unknowingly planted a deep pain in the heart of the elderly janitor, forcing him to confront things he had long tried to bury deep within himself. And no one knew that, just a few minutes later, the very janitor they had so scornfully dismissed would step onto that stage and change the course of the entire night, in a way no one could ever have expected. Benjamin's old cleaning cart had only rolled a few meters when Charlotte's sharp and malicious voice rang out clearly, as if she meant for him and everyone around to hear it. If just cleaning makes you mistake this priceless Steinway piano for a mere object, then clearly you know nothing about music, Mr. Davis. Her words were like a sharp blade, casually cutting deep into Benjamin's heart, each one awakening long-buried pain. He stopped, not turning around, but every muscle on his aged face seemed to struggle to hold back the overwhelming emotion rising in his chest. His eyes, deeper than ever, reflected the backstage darkness, but also the deep hurt he was enduring from a young girl who was younger than his own grandchildren. Laughter erupted immediately after Charlotte's words, spreading through the backstage like a contagious, toxic disease. Charlotte's friends, young artists in expensive, luxurious clothes, didn't hesitate to laugh with delight at the harm they had just witnessed. To them, the old janitor was nothing more than an entertainment toy, someone they could mock and despise without any guilt or remorse. The eyes of contempt and ridicule turned toward Benjamin, but none of them saw the elderly man trembling slightly, trying to hold in his emotions, clinging to the last shred of dignity he had left. They didn't see the deepening wrinkles on his face, nor did they notice the aging hands gripping the cart's handle until his knuckles turned white. All they saw was a lowly man, an easy target for their cruel jokes, but Charlotte didn't stop there. She ran her fingers through her shimmering blonde hair, a cold smile curling on her lips, and continued in a voice full of taunting disdain. Honestly, I don't understand why a place like this would allow people like you to even be at such prestigious performances. A janitor who knows nothing about art should stay where he belongs, in the dusty, hidden corners, far from the stage, far from the luxurious spotlight. This is not your place. Her words were followed by louder, more venomous laughter from her friends, shaking the already heavy atmosphere. A few audience members nearby turned their heads, whispering with mixed curiosity and clear discomfort, as they saw Benjamin standing there, motionless like a silent ghost. Benjamin still didn't turn around or say a word. The silence only seemed to amuse Charlotte and her friends more, as if the old man's endurance and patience were proof of his inferiority, his lowliness. Charlotte took a few steps forward, close enough for Benjamin to feel the coldness of her gaze and the arrogance in her voice. "Mr. Davis, next time you want to touch something valuable, remember that only those who truly understand its worth are worthy of touching it. Don't make yourself the laughing stock again. I sincerely advise you." Benjamin closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remain calm, but his heart was shaking, shattered by the cruel words he had just heard. He had witnessed so many ups and downs in life, faced countless prejudices, and been looked down upon just for the color of his skin, for the lowly work he did. But never before had he felt such deep pain, for this time it came from a young person, a talented artist he had always quietly admired. His eyes opened once more, but this time they had changed, deeper, more emotional. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, but a slow-burning pain, the disappointment and deep hurt of a man who had lived his life in endurance, humility, and patience. He gently lowered his head and spoke in a calm, sincere voice. "I apologize, Miss Whitmore. I understand my place. I'm sorry for disturbing you." He then pushed his cart and continued walking. Each step he took echoed in the heavy silence of the backstage, each footstep like a hammer driving deep into everyone's hearts. But it seemed only he felt the true weight of that moment. Benjamin walked away in silence, leaving behind the fading chuckles and the lingering whispers of mockery. He understood that in their eyes he was still invisible, a man of no value, someone they could easily trample on whenever they wished. But deep in his soul, there remained a small, faint hope that someday young people like Charlotte Whitmore would realize that a person's true worth is not in their appearance or social status, but in their kindness, compassion, and humility in their hearts. What Benjamin didn't know was that in that moment, as he bowed his head and walked away, just a few minutes later, it would become a pivotal moment that would change his life, Charlotte Whitmore's life, and completely transform the seemingly perfect night. The slow footsteps of Benjamin had just disappeared behind the stage when the backstage atmosphere immediately returned to its noisy, bustling state. Charlotte's laughter, along with the mocking looks from her group of friends, still echoed down the halls, continuing to spread arrogance and satisfaction on their faces. But no one noticed that, in the shadowy backstage area, Benjamin had stopped. An air of quiet reflection and determination enveloped him. Benjamin took a deep breath, his aged eyes gazing toward the stage, where the precious Steinway piano sat silently under the sparkling lights, as if waiting for a deserving hand to touch its perfect keys. The cruel words, the mocking laughter from earlier, still reverberated in his mind, but now they had turned into motivation, a powerful urge that led him to make a decision he never thought he would make. Benjamin's footsteps once again rang out, but this time he didn't head toward his usual dark corner. Instead, he walked toward the stage, each step slow but deliberate. His hands still trembled slightly, but his gaze was unwavering. To the astonishment of everyone present, the old janitor walked straight onto the stage, gently placing his hands on the precious Steinway piano, the very same piano that had made him endure so many cruel remarks. The entire hall fell into complete silence. No more mocking laughter, no more whispered insults, only stunned, disbelieving gazes focused on Benjamin. "What is he doing?" A confused voice came from the back. "Impossible! Does he think he's going to play the piano?" Another voice whispered in disbelief. Charlotte Whitmore, standing closest to the stage, opened her bright blue eyes wide in shock and anger, as if Benjamin's appearance next to the piano was a direct insult to her. Her lips tightened, and her beautiful face became colder and sharper than ever before. "Mr. Davis," her voice rang out clearly and sharply, "what do you think you're doing? Stop this foolishness and step down immediately." Benjamin didn't turn to look at Charlotte. He seemed not to hear her, or perhaps he simply chose not to. He gently pulled out the piano bench, the soft squeak of the seat filling the tense silence of the hall. Benjamin sat down, slowly placing his old wrinkled hands on the shining keys. At this moment, Charlotte, nearly out of patience, stepped forward, ready to speak again and drive the man she considered inferior off the stage. But before she could open her mouth, a sound rang out. A single note, pure, clear, and resonant, like a bell ringing in the stillness. It was just one simple note, but it was powerful enough to immediately silence everyone in the hall, leaving them stunned and speechless. Benjamin began to play. His aged, wrinkled fingers moved gently, gracefully over the keys, like an experienced and powerful dancer. The music slowly spread, softly weaving into every corner of the hall, filling the space with an indescribable sense of awe and emotion. No one in the audience could believe what they were witnessing. The old janitor, the very man they had mocked and scorned, was now creating a piece of music so powerful and emotional it far exceeded their expectations. Charlotte stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. She was completely captivated by the notes Benjamin was playing, her heart feeling simultaneously stunned, embarrassed, and angry, as she realized how foolishly she had underestimated this man. Benjamin played a piece of music that no one could recognize immediately, a piece he had never rehearsed before. Yet it was flawless in every melody. It was a beautiful and profound tune, both powerful and gentle, as if his very heart was speaking, one that had carried so many untold feelings and years of struggle. Below, in the hall, all the guests, music critics, and even those who had once mocked Benjamin were sitting silently, utterly mesmerized by this magical music. One by one, they felt ashamed for having belittled and ridiculed this man. They realized they had made a terrible mistake in how they had judged him. Charlotte Whitmore, who had been so arrogant just moments ago, now stood motionless, her eyes blurred by an indescribable emotion. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do or what to say in the face of what was happening before her. Charlotte slowly began to realize that not only had she been wrong in judging Benjamin, but she had also been wrong in how she judged the true value of music, something she had always believed she completely mastered. And in that moment, Benjamin Davis, the elderly janitor, the man who had been looked down upon and invisible in the eyes of others, was no longer just a janitor. He was now standing on the grand stage, becoming a true artist, a person with extraordinary talent, conveying music filled with emotion and depth that touched the hearts and souls of everyone who had once mocked him. A sudden moment that completely changed the course of this musical gala, a moment that made every prejudice and arrogance vanish in an instant. From the very first notes that filled the air, the entire hall immediately fell into a profound silence. No more mocking laughter, no more whispering insults, only music that was captivating and magical, spreading throughout the space. Benjamin sat at the precious Steinway piano, his old yet powerful hands gliding over the keys with a mesmerizing grace, creating deep melodies that resonated in the hearts and souls of the listeners. Charlotte Whitmore stood motionless at the edge of the stage, her bright blue eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't believe what was happening right before her eyes. Just moments ago, she had been smug, self-satisfied, mocking the old man with the harshest words, but now she was completely disoriented. Charlotte could feel every note Benjamin played not just resonating in the air, but vibrating within her own soul. A soul that had always been cold and arrogant, never yielding to anyone. Benjamin's music was unlike anything Charlotte had ever heard before. It wasn't simply perfect technique or absolute precision as she had always strived for. No, this melody was a fusion of intense emotion and deep life experiences. It was the pain, the joy, the love, and the quiet losses he had buried deep within himself for so long. Benjamin seemed to be telling a story through the notes, a story of his own life, filled with emotional nuances that no listener could ignore. Charlotte's friends, the young artists who had mocked him before, now stood frozen in awe, silent with embarrassment. They had once thought they understood what true music was, but it was only now, hearing the old janitor play, that they realized that true music has the power to touch the deepest parts of the human soul, something they had never been able to achieve. In the hall, the distinguished guests, discerning music critics, and wealthy parents were all completely captivated by this deeply moving melody. Some gently wiped away tears as they felt Benjamin's powerful music stir them to their very core. They began to wonder how such a talented man could have spent so many years as a janitor, with no one ever noticing his greatness. On stage, Benjamin continued to play, entirely immersed in his own world. His fingers moved with precision that seemed almost unbelievable. Yet there was also a natural flow and depth, as if he was born to play this piano, as if music were the only language that allowed him to express all the things he could never say with words. Charlotte felt her heart tremble, and the walls of arrogance she had built over the years slowly began to crumble before the invisible power of music. She couldn't take her eyes off Benjamin, the man she had just moments ago deemed inferior and worthless. She realized a painful truth, that the music she had always performed was just perfect technical displays, while true music, the kind that can change hearts, was something she had never touched. Benjamin gently transitioned from a heart-wrenching melody to a slower, softer piece. The sound was like a comforting word, a form of forgiveness he offered to everyone who had once looked down upon him and hurt him, especially Charlotte. Each note seemed to soothe the pain, gradually melting away the cold, indifferent layers in the hearts of every listener. As the piece neared its end, the entire hall seemed frozen in emotion. A few seconds after the final note rang out, no one dared to clap, no one dared to speak. They all sat in silence, trying to absorb the profound resonance of the music they had just heard. Benjamin slowly withdrew his hands from the keys, looking down at them, and a gentle, humble smile flickered across his wrinkled face. Charlotte Whitmore seemed to snap out of her trance. She shakily raised her hand to cover her mouth, struggling to contain the overwhelming emotions rising within her. She felt an intense regret burning inside her. A regret for how cruelly she had treated such a talented and respectable man as Benjamin. She realized she had made a grave mistake, and for the first time in her life, Charlotte Whitmore, the arrogant, rising star of the music world, saw herself as small, weak, and utterly defeated by true music, the music that came from the heart. The hall remained in silence, but it was a very different silence, one of respect, admiration, and deep emotion. All eyes were on Benjamin, the elderly janitor who had now become the center of this musical gala, the man who had touched the hearts of everyone, including Charlotte Whitmore, the young girl who had once been arrogant, but now stood frozen in the first awakening of her life. As the hall remained immersed in the deep silence of awe and shock following the miraculous piece of music, the sound of firm, authoritative footsteps suddenly echoed on the marble floor behind. Everyone, including Charlotte Whitmore, turned in unison to look, their eyes widening in surprise at the sight of a woman walking confidently toward the stage, her expression serious and dignified. The woman wore a meticulously tailored dark blue suit, her hair styled in a neat updo, her face sharp, her eyes radiating authority, elegance, and a special kind of respect. No one knew who she was, but the way she walked, full of confidence and power, made it clear she was no ordinary audience member. She stopped right beside the stage, where Benjamin Davis was still seated at the precious Steinway piano, his aged hands gently resting on the polished keys. She looked at Benjamin, her eyes showing an emotion she couldn't hide, then spoke in a clear, powerful voice that echoed throughout the hall for everyone to hear. "Forgive me for interrupting this magnificent performance, but I must announce something important right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to seek out someone who was once a legend in the world of classical music in America, someone who has been thought to have vanished from the artistic world for nearly 20 years. The hall immediately buzzed with excitement. Whispers of surprise and curiosity began to spread through the audience. Charlotte Whitmore stood frozen, staring at the woman before turning her gaze to Benjamin, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. The woman slowly took another step forward, her eyes fixed on Benjamin, her voice softer now, but still clear and filled with respect. "Sir, I have been searching for you for many years. I never expected to find you here in this special circumstance." She paused for a few seconds, as if calming the emotions rising within her, then continued with a voice full of emotion and reverence. Benjamin Davis Ellison, former principal pianist of the New York Symphony Orchestra, a living legend of classical music, this is you. The moment she uttered his full name, the entire hall nearly erupted in shock. Gasps rang out from all corners of the auditorium, and some people couldn't contain their astonishment, rising from their seats to get a better look at the elderly man sitting silently at the piano on the stage. A few older music critics in the audience immediately raised their hands to cover their mouths, their eyes wide open in disbelief, astonishment, and even emotion, as they heard a name they thought had long faded into obscurity. Charlotte Whitmore felt her heart nearly stop. She looked at Benjamin, the man she had just moments ago called someone who knows nothing about music, with eyes that could barely believe what she was seeing. The harsh, arrogant words she had directed at him now echoed in her mind, turning into an overwhelming shame and regret she couldn't put into words. She, a young, talented, and proud artist, had just insulted a living legend, a man who had once stood at the pinnacle of the classical music world. This made her feel as if she were the one who knew nothing about music. Meanwhile, Benjamin remained seated at the piano, showing no surprise or confusion as his true identity was revealed. His eyes were lowered toward the keys, a gentle, humble, and somewhat sad smile passing briefly across his aged face. He knew that the secret he had kept hidden for nearly 20 years had now been exposed to everyone. But this time, he didn't feel fear or anxiety. On the contrary, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if he had finally been freed from the burden of his past. The woman continued to walk toward Benjamin, her voice softer now, filled with sincere respect. Mr. Ellison, on behalf of the National Music Council, I am extending an official invitation for you to return to the world of music. Your return will be an invaluable gift to classical music, as well as to all of us who have always admired you and waited for your return. Her heartfelt words filled the hall once again with profound silence. All eyes were on Benjamin, and no one looked at him as the old lowly janitor anymore. Now, they looked at him with admiration and respect for a true legend. Benjamin slowly stood up, politely bowing his head in response to the formal invitation. His gaze swept across everyone in the hall before pausing for a long moment on Charlotte Whitmore's face. The young woman standing still, pale and filled with deep shame. No words of reproach, no angry remarks were spoken, but Benjamin's kind and understanding gaze at that moment said everything. It was the gaze of a man who had been through so much, someone who had once stood at the peak of glory, but also tasted the pain of being forgotten and looked down upon. A man who today had taught everyone, especially Charlotte Whitmore, a priceless lesson in humility, kindness, and the true meaning of music. In that moment, no one dared to look down on Benjamin anymore. The entire hall understood that they had just witnessed a real miracle, a shocking secret that had completely changed their perception of a man they had once considered insignificant. Benjamin Davis Ellison, the living legend of classical music, had officially returned to the world he truly belonged to, a world he had never truly left. The compassionate and emotional gaze of Benjamin remained quietly fixed on Charlotte Whitmore, but in that gaze there was no reproach, nor any trace of the hurt he had just endured. Instead, there was forgiveness, as if he had forgiven everything, even the harshest words she had once directed at him. Benjamin slowly stood up, facing the entire silent audience still waiting in anticipation. He took a deep breath, his old eyes filled with sorrow, and then his warm, steady voice began, slow and full of emotion. I know that many of you are probably very surprised by what has just happened. Perhaps you are wondering why someone like me, who once stood at the peak of music, would choose a life of quietude, nearly invisible for nearly 20 years. Benjamin paused for a moment, gathering courage before continuing the story he had kept hidden for so long. His eyes became distant, filled with memories both joyful and sorrowful. Music once meant everything to me. I stood on the most prestigious stages in the world, feeling the joy of my melodies touching the hearts of thousands, millions of listeners. But that joy was also the greatest pain in my life. The entire hall held its breath, every word from Benjamin now stirring deep emotion in the audience. Charlotte stood still, her eyes wide open, listening intently to every word. Her heart moved profoundly. Nearly 20 years ago, at the peak of my career, my only daughter, Emily Ellison, a young, brilliant musical prodigy, my pride and hope, passed away in a tragic car accident caused by a drunk driver. Benjamin stopped, his throat choking up, his voice trembling, and his old eyes welling with tears. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to fall into a deep, sorrowful silence. No one dared to speak, only silently directing their eyes toward the man standing on stage, carrying an irreplaceable pain. He continued, his voice soft, as if whispering the painful truth. My Emily was only 16, almost the same age as you, Charlotte. She had just won the national piano competition and was on her way home after the performance to celebrate with me. But in an instant, life cruelly took everything from me. That accident not only took my daughter, but it also took away the meaning of my life and the music in my heart. Benjamin turned his gaze toward the Steinway piano beside him, his eyes filled with emotion as he spoke of it. This piano, this very one, was the last instrument Emily ever performed on before she left me forever. I have not had the courage to touch any other piano since the day my daughter passed, because every time I saw the keys, I saw Emily, her radiant smile, playing her favorite piece. The deep confession moved the audience, and many had to wipe away silent tears that had been rolling down their cheeks. Even the coldest of hearts were melted by Benjamin's tragic and heartfelt story. Charlotte, at that moment, felt her heart twist in pain, her eyes wet with tears she hadn't even realized were falling. She remembered her harsh words to Benjamin just moments ago, filled with deep shame and regret. Charlotte realized that she hadn't just insulted a talented artist, she had unknowingly touched the deepest wound in the heart of this elderly man. Benjamin looked around the hall once again, his eyes now filled with warmth and forgiveness. After losing Emily, I chose to step away from the spotlight. I chose to become a janitor, not because I hated music, but because I wanted to be closer to the simple things in life, to soothe the pain of a loss that could never be replaced in my heart. I thought perhaps time would help me forget, but it turns out I could never forget. He paused for a few seconds, his eyes looking down at his trembling hands. Today, when I accidentally touched this piano, the memories of Emily, of my life in music, came rushing back stronger than ever. I realized that for the past 20 years, I had quietly lived in pain and self-avoidance. But today, music saved me, helping me realize that Emily still lives in every note, every melody I play. Benjamin smiled softly, a sad yet peaceful smile. He gently touched the keys once more, but this time it was a caress, as if he was gently stroking the hair of Emily, his beloved daughter. I tell you my story, not to gain pity or admiration. I only wish to remind us all, especially young people like you, Charlotte, to cherish those around you, not to judge them by their appearance or the work they do, because each of us has our own story, our own pain that not everyone can easily reveal. His words were a gentle but powerful reminder to Charlotte. She felt each word digging deeper into her soul, breaking down all the prejudices, arrogance, and selfishness she had carried with her. And in that moment, Charlotte Whitmore, the young girl once full of pride and coldness, fully realized the true value of kindness, empathy, and sincere love, qualities that Benjamin Davis Ellison, the man she had once looked down upon, had just shared with everyone, especially her, the one who needed that lesson more than anyone else. As Benjamin's heartbreaking and emotional story came to an end, the entire hall fell into a prolonged silence. But within Charlotte Whitmore's heart, a far greater turmoil and shock were raging. The heart of the young girl now felt like a shattered mirror, its sharp pieces of shame, regret, and anguish cutting deep into her soul, bit by bit with unbearable pain. Charlotte stood motionless in the spotlight, a place where just moments ago she had stood proud, confident, and completely in control. But now her usual perfect facade had vanished, revealing a young girl, fragile, vulnerable, and drowning in shame. All the arrogance and coldness that had defined her before were swept away, leaving her soul exposed to the truth about herself. In her mind, the harsh words she had once so carelessly directed at Benjamin echoed incessantly. Those sharp, contemptuous words replayed in her mind like knives, cutting into her young conscience. Charlotte suddenly realized that, in her short yet glorious life, she had never felt this ashamed. She slowly lifted her bright blue eyes to look at Benjamin, the old man she had once looked down on, the man who had just moved the entire hall with his tragic life story. Benjamin remained standing there, his eyes gentle and forgiving, showing no trace of resentment or anger. But it was his kindness that made Charlotte's heart ache even more. She longed for his forgiveness, but lacked the courage to say the words. Benjamin's gaze seemed to understand Charlotte's turmoil. He gently nodded to her, as if telling her that he had forgiven her long ago, that he harbored no ill will toward her. Yet, that sincere, unconditional forgiveness only deepened Charlotte's pain and shame, for she knew she had never truly deserved such kindness. Charlotte struggled to control her emotions, but she could not stop her trembling hands, nor could she prevent the silent tears that were now rolling down her beautiful face, blurring it with deep emotional pain. All that she had once been proud of, her musical talent, her family's fame, the admiration of others, now felt meaningless. For she had just made the gravest mistake of her life, underestimating the value of a person and disregarding their deep pain. In the midst of the crowded hall, Charlotte felt as though it was just her and Benjamin in that moment. All sound, all whispers seemed to disappear, leaving only the echo from her heart, crying out for forgiveness. Charlotte stepped forward, moving cautiously toward Benjamin with the awkwardness of a young girl trying to apologize to her father after making a serious mistake. "Mr. Ellison." Charlotte's voice trembled, soft as though she could hardly believe the words she was about to speak. I don't know how to say this, but I need you to understand the regret and shame I feel in my heart right now. I truly apologize for all the cruel words and thoughtless actions I have directed toward you." Benjamin looked at the young girl with his gentle eyes, saying nothing, but he nodded again, signaling that he was listening, understanding the sincerity in her heart. Charlotte continued, her voice growing softer as her emotions became stronger. "I was too arrogant, too selfish to judge others. I thought I understood music, but the truth is, I never understood its true meaning. Music is not just technique, not just perfection. It is emotion, love, pain, and empathy. All of that I've only just understood thanks to you." Her heartfelt words seemed to slowly heal the wounds that she had caused, not only for Benjamin but also for herself. Charlotte was no longer the arrogant girl. She was simply a young person learning how to live with a heart full of love and empathy. Benjamin looked at Charlotte, his voice ringing out softly, deeply empathetic. "Charlotte, we all make mistakes. The most important thing is not the mistakes we make, but how we correct them and learn from them. My daughter was once a young artist, full of potential like you, and I always hoped that young people like you would grow up with kindness, cherishing the value of the simple things around you." Charlotte lowered her head, her heart full of emotion at Benjamin's kind and gentle words. The young girl now fully realized the priceless lesson he had just given her, a lesson about humility and the true meaning of empathy and kindness. And in that moment, in the brilliant light of the stage, amidst the emotionally charged silence of the hall, Charlotte Whitmore officially let go of her arrogance and coldness, choosing to face the painful truth about herself. In that instant, Charlotte was no longer the proud angel she once was, but simply a regular, weak, and sincere person trying to rediscover her true worth. Through the gaze of understanding and gentleness from Benjamin Davis Ellison, the man who had changed her life forever. As Charlotte finished her heartfelt and emotional apology, she looked up at Benjamin with tear-filled eyes, offering him all the sincerity she could express. In that moment, every eye in the hall turned toward the elderly man, waiting in suspense and emotion for his reaction. They knew that what he was about to say could be the final judgment, a gentle forgiveness or a reproach that could make Charlotte carry the weight of shame for the rest of her life. Benjamin looked at Charlotte. His eyes filled not with reproach but with deep empathy, as one who had endured many ups and downs. A gentle, warm smile appeared on his lips, soothing the pain and guilt that had engulfed the young girl's soul. He slowly walked closer to Charlotte, his voice rising softly, filled with understanding. "Charlotte, the most important thing is not that we make mistakes, but how we face and correct them. Everyone makes mistakes, and music is no different. True music is not about hitting every note perfectly, but about feeling the depth of each wrong note. Let your heart guide you, and you will find the true meaning of music." His simple, yet profoundly deep words instantly illuminated Charlotte's mind, making her realize something she had never considered before. For years, she had chased perfection in music, every technique mastered, every performance precise down to the smallest detail. But she had never truly understood that the deep value of music does not lie in perfection, but in the sincerity and real emotion that come from the heart of the artist. Charlotte remembered the tense, pressure-filled practice sessions she had gone through, always seeking recognition and admiration from others with technically perfect pieces that lacked the genuine emotion of true feeling. Now, through Benjamin's simple yet wise words, Charlotte fully understood why her previous performances, no matter how perfect, always lacked something. A true emotion, the sincere empathy that only the heart of a true artist can convey. Charlotte looked at Benjamin. Her eyes filled not only with deep gratitude, but also with boundless respect for the man who had just given her the most valuable lesson of her life. The young girl gently nodded, her voice trembling but full of determination. "Thank you, Mr. Ellison. I promise I will never forget what you've taught me today. I will no longer make music just a tool to express myself. I will strive to make it a language for my heart to communicate with the world." Benjamin smiled kindly, his eyes filled with satisfaction as he saw the profound awakening in the young girl before him. He gently placed his hand on Charlotte's shoulder, a tender and warm gesture, like a father comforting his daughter. "Charlotte, I believe you will succeed. Remember, each of us has wrong notes in life, but it's those wrong notes that create the most beautiful and meaningful melody. Cherish those mistakes, because they will help you grow, make you deeper, and help you understand yourself better. The hall was filled with deep emotion. Everyone felt as though their hearts had been cleansed, lighter and purer, by Benjamin's sincere and profound words. Charlotte's friends, the ones who had mocked him at the beginning, now lowered their heads, feeling ashamed and silently thanking him for giving them all a priceless lesson in humility and compassion. Charlotte turned to look at the precious Steinway piano, a piano that, for her, was no longer just a musical instrument but a symbol of forgiveness, love, and the profound awakening in her soul. She gently placed her hand on the keys, for the first time in her life feeling each breath, each small vibration, full of meaning, from the piano she had once seen as just a tool to express her superiority. Benjamin watched the scene, a satisfied smile on his face, knowing that his lesson had truly touched Charlotte's heart. He turned back to look at the hall, his voice once again rising, gentle but strong, spreading throughout the space like a message of wisdom and humanity for everyone present. I hope that all of us, those present in this hall, will always remember that the true value of a person is not found in wealth, fame, or appearance, but in how we treat those around us with sincerity, kindness, and love. We all have our own stories, our own notes in the melody of life. Let's listen to them and cherish them with all our hearts. Benjamin's words ended in a deep, moving silence. Everyone in the hall now understood that they had just witnessed a true miracle. Not just the return of a music legend, but also the profound awakening of a young girl who had once been lost in her own arrogance. At that moment, Charlotte Whitmore was no longer the proud genius she once was. She had truly become a true artist, standing at the threshold of a new journey, the journey to find real music from her own heart, guided by the simple yet deeply profound words that Benjamin Davis Ellison had given her. True music is not about hitting the right notes, but about feeling the wrong notes. Let your heart guide you. As Charlotte's heartfelt and emotional apology ended, she looked up at Benjamin with tear-filled eyes, offering him all the sincerity she could express. In that moment, every eye in the hall turned toward the elderly man, eagerly awaiting his response, filled with anticipation and emotion. They knew that what he was about to say could be the final judgment, a gentle forgiveness or a reproach that could make Charlotte carry the burden of shame for the rest of her life. Benjamin looked at Charlotte. His eyes filled not with reproach but with deep empathy, as someone who had been through many ups and downs. A gentle, warm smile appeared on his lips, easing the pain and regret that had enveloped the young girl's soul. He slowly walked toward Charlotte, his voice rising softly, filled with encouragement but also carrying an important challenge for the young girl. "Charlotte, are you ready to perform once again? But this time, let your heart guide you. Play music from the true emotions in your soul, not to impress anyone else, but to find yourself." Charlotte flinched at his suggestion, her eyes showing confusion and trembling. A part of her felt fear, worried that she might not be able to do it, that she wouldn't be able to step onto the stage with her heart completely exposed to the gaze of everyone watching her. But deep inside, Charlotte understood that this was her only chance to redeem the huge mistake she had made with Benjamin, the man who had opened his heart to her and forgave her unconditionally. Charlotte took a deep breath, trying to gather the courage to step onto the stage once more. Each step she took was filled with trembling, the awkwardness of a young girl facing herself for the first time. No longer with her arrogant mask, no longer with sharp words to hide her weakness. Now, Charlotte Whitmore was stepping onto the stage with all the sincerity, courage, and humility she had never experienced before. She slowly sat down in front of the Steinway piano, her trembling hands resting on the keys. the coldness of the piano keys now feeling completely different from the time she had performed before. Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to calm herself. Her heart pounding so fast it felt like it might burst out of her chest at any moment. Tears began to roll down her cheeks again, but this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of liberation, of profound awakening in her soul. Charlotte opened her eyes, looking down at the black and white keys in front of her. In that moment, she remembered Benjamin's heartbreaking story. She remembered Emily, his talented and beautiful daughter whom he had lost. Charlotte felt as though she owed Emily something very important. It was the responsibility of a true artist, the responsibility to bring sincere music that touches the hearts of listeners, not to showcase oneself or claim fleeting glory. And then, in the complete silence of the hall, Charlotte began to play. No longer was it about perfect technique to show off. No longer was it about the arrogance to impress. This was the first time in her life that the young girl played with all the most sincere emotions from her heart. Her music was now a blend of regret, gratitude, love, and deep empathy for the man who had helped her awaken. Each note Charlotte played was not technically perfect, but it was strangely perfect in its emotion. The sounds that filled the hall were pure, filled with emotion, and they snaked into the hearts of everyone listening to her, especially Benjamin, who stood silently beside the stage, watching Charlotte with a look of satisfaction and emotion. He understood that, in the end, the once arrogant young girl had truly grasped the most important thing about music, and now she was sharing it with everyone from the depth of her heart. Charlotte's friends, the ones who had once stood by her side in arrogance and coldness, were now sitting quietly, completely absorbed in the sincere music she was creating. They felt each note as it reached deep into the hidden corners of their souls, making them realize that they had made a grave mistake by always seeing music as a tool for fame, to assert their social status. Charlotte continued to play, her music growing deeper and more emotional with each passing moment. Her tears still fell, but her hands no longer trembled. Instead, they were filled with determination, courage, and sincerity that Benjamin had instilled in her. In that moment, Charlotte was no longer the arrogant music star. She had become a true artist, telling the story of her life through the sounds echoing from the depths of her heart. When the music finally came to a close, Charlotte gently finished the last notes with absolute tenderness and sincerity. She released her hands from the keys, and a profound silence enveloped the entire hall. In an instant, no one dared to clap, no one dared to speak. Everyone was immersed in the deep emotion Charlotte had just brought to them through the truest and most profound music. Benjamin stepped onto the stage, placing his hand on Charlotte's shoulder once more, this time to comfort, encourage, and give her the recognition she truly deserved. He gently spoke into her ear. "You did very well, Charlotte. Today you have truly found the true value of yourself." Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes filled with deep gratitude and respect. In that moment, she understood that Benjamin had not only given her a chance to redeem her mistake, but had also given her a priceless gift, the gift of awakening, kindness, and the most sincere love in both music and life. As the last notes from Charlotte's trembling yet sincere hands faded away, the hall remained enveloped in an unprecedented emotional silence. There was no sound, no whispering or murmurs, only the lingering resonance of the music, the most genuine music born from the heart of the young girl who had just undergone a deeply difficult yet invaluable inner journey. Charlotte's eyes slowly opened, her face still wet with tears, but in her gaze now shone a sense of liberation, a true feeling of freedom that she had never known before. For the first time in her life, she realized that music was no longer a burden of perfection, no longer a means of self-expression for others to admire. It was her way of truly communicating with the world through her deepest, most sincere emotions. Charlotte gently looked down at her hands, fingers that had once been rigorously trained to be perfect in every technique, now trembling with emotion and confusion before the miraculous power of sincerity. The piece she had just played, not perfect in technique, had been so genuine that it touched the hearts of everyone in the hall, even those who had once held skepticism and prejudice. Benjamin stood silently next to Charlotte, his eyes full of pride, as if he had just witnessed an important moment in his own daughter's life. He knew that Charlotte had fully emerged from the shadow of arrogance and coldness, and now she had truly become a real artist, one who had found herself through music. In the audience, Charlotte's friends, who had once mocked Benjamin alongside her, now sat in silence, heads lowered, feeling deeply ashamed of their actions and words. The genuine music Charlotte had just created awakened in them empathy and self-awareness of their own mistakes, making them realize that true value never lies in wealth or social status, but in a sincere heart and the ability to empathize with others. Charlotte slowly stood up from the piano bench, walking toward the center of the stage, her voice trembling but clear, filled with sincerity and humility. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to my music today. But most of all, I want to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Benjamin Ellison, who has taught me the most important lesson about the value of music, and more importantly, about the value of a heart that knows empathy and love. The entire hall remained in silence, but now everyone could feel the sincerity in every word Charlotte spoke. All eyes turned toward Benjamin, the elderly man with an unassuming demeanor but an immensely generous heart. Standing silently at the side of the stage, his face kind yet full of emotion. Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger, full of resolve. I understand now that I was once very arrogant, always believing that perfection and technique were the most important things in music. But I was completely wrong. Mr. Benjamin has helped me understand that the truest and most beautiful music always comes from the heart, from sincerity and compassion. Things I never truly felt before. Charlotte turned her head to look at Benjamin once more, her voice filled with sincere gratitude. Mr. Ellison, today you have not only given me a lesson, but also a priceless opportunity to find myself. I promise that from now on I will live and play music with all the sincerity you have taught me. Benjamin smiled gently, not saying a word, but nodding softly. His eyes filled with satisfaction and pride as he looked at the profound growth and awakening in the young girl he had once worried about. When Charlotte finished her deeply emotional speech, the hall erupted into thunderous applause. Not just for her musical performance, but more importantly, for the genuine awakening she had just experienced. All the audience members, from the toughest music critics to the distinguished guests, now stood and clapped enthusiastically, as if they were witnessing a rare and precious moment of true awakening and deep growth in a person. Charlotte stood motionless in the center of the stage, her eyes wet, but this time the tears were those of relief and boundless happiness as she was freed from her former arrogance and selfishness. For the first time in her life, the young girl felt what true freedom in music was, sharing sincere emotion without being bound by anything other than genuine love. Benjamin slowly walked up to the stage, standing beside Charlotte, gently taking her hand, like a father guiding his daughter. The two stood together, representing two different generations of artists, but at this moment they shared a meaningful message about kindness, empathy, and the true value of music and life. In that moment, Charlotte understood that from today on her life would be completely different. She was no longer the arrogant music prodigy. She would become a true artist, always carrying with her the invaluable lesson that Benjamin had just given her, to live and create with sincerity and love, both in music and in life. As the thunderous applause filled the hall, Charlotte and Benjamin stood together silently on stage, two generations of artists now united in a deeply emotional and meaningful moment. The applause from the audience was not merely for the performance that had just occurred, but also for Charlotte's courage and genuine growth, and for Benjamin Ellison's humility, forgiveness, and compassion. From the front row, the mayor of Charleston, who had been silently observing everything unfold, slowly rose and walked up to the stage with clear respect. He stopped before Benjamin, a simple man whose life story and extraordinary kindness had just moved the entire hall. The mayor gently extended his hand to shake Benjamin's, his gaze sincere and filled with admiration. "Mr. Ellison, on behalf of the Charleston community, I offer you our deepest respect. Your story and music today have changed all of us, especially the youth of this city. We are deeply grateful to you." Benjamin shook his hand gently in return, his face still marked by humility. He bowed his head slightly and spoke with a warm yet clear voice. "I am deeply touched by your kind words, Mr. Mayor. But what matters most to me is not fame or personal glory. What I truly desire is simply to touch the hearts of others, to help them realize the true value of compassion, empathy, and forgiveness." Once again, the audience erupted into applause, this time louder than before. All eyes were filled with respect and admiration for the man they had previously underestimated, and they realized that Benjamin was not only an extraordinary artist but also a remarkable person with an exceptionally beautiful soul. Charlotte's friends, who had once lived in the superficiality of wealth and fame, now sat in silence, their faces thoughtful and their eyes reflective. They realized that they too had once lived shallow and selfish lives, only pursuing surface-level values, forgetting that the true worth of a person lies in their heart, filled with love, empathy, and genuine humility. The lesson from Benjamin and Charlotte today was a lesson for everyone that sincerity and compassion are the most precious values. The mayor continued, this time with a serious yet emotional tone. "Our city of Charleston has long been proud of its cultural and artistic values. But perhaps today we have been reminded of something even more important than the usual artistic achievements. That is, the character and dignity of the artist. Mr. Ellison and Ms. Charlotte have given us a wonderful example of that value." He then turned to Charlotte, his expression warm and sincere. "Charlotte, today you have shown remarkable courage in facing and correcting your mistakes before everyone. That is the true quality of a great artist. We are all very proud of you." Charlotte bowed her head humbly, her voice soft yet filled with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to everyone for giving me the precious opportunity to reflect on myself. I will never forget the important lesson Mr. Benjamin has taught me, and I promise I will always live and perform music with the sincerity he has shown me today." Another round of applause erupted, affirming that Charlotte had truly earned the recognition and respect of everyone, not just for her exceptional musical talent, but more importantly for the deep, sincere change in her heart. The mayor turned to Benjamin once more, his voice sincere and serious. "Mr. Ellison, as the mayor of Charleston, I am honored to invite you to return to the stage regularly, so our community can continue to be inspired by your music and the remarkable story of your life." Benjamin smiled politely, gently shaking his head. "I am very grateful for this esteemed invitation, sir. But as I have said before, I do not wish to return to the stage for fame. I simply hope that the music and story I shared today can become a small lesson, a simple message for everyone about sincerity, compassion, and love. That is the only stage I truly wish to perform on." The mayor paused for a moment, nodding with understanding, his eyes filled with deep respect for the humble yet noble man before him. "I understand and deeply appreciate your decision, Mr. Ellison. Regardless, today you have truly touched all of our hearts, and that is the most wonderful thing an artist can do." The hall once again erupted into the loudest applause yet, as every eye now looked at Benjamin with admiration and respect. The elderly man, humble in appearance but with a heart full of generosity, had just conveyed a profound and powerful message about kindness, humility, and true love. In that moment, Benjamin understood that, at last, his mission had been fulfilled, not as a grand return to the stage, but as the ability to touch the hearts of others and help them recognize the true value of life and themselves. This, he knew, was the truest music, the music he had always believed in and pursued throughout his life. As the final applause faded into the deep silence of the hall, Charlotte gently stepped down from the stage, her heart still deeply moved by the sincere emotions she had just experienced. She paused in a small corner of the hallway behind the backstage area, where the soft light from the overhead bulbs illuminated the thoughtful expression on the face of the once arrogant young girl. Charlotte stood there, her breath slowing, her heart still racing, filled with deep gratitude and a sincere desire to speak the most heartfelt words to the person who had changed her life forever, Benjamin Ellison. A few minutes later, from the end of the hallway, Benjamin slowly walked toward her, his pace calm and his expression kind. He immediately recognized the young girl waiting for him, her eyes filled with longing and a sincerity rarely seen. Benjamin stopped before Charlotte, his gaze gentle and profound, filled with empathy, with no hint of reproach for anything she had said or done before. Charlotte took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak first, her voice trembling yet clear in the quiet space. "Mr. Ellison, I know I've made many mistakes. I sincerely apologize for the thoughtless and harsh words I once directed at you. Now I understand the pain you've endured, and I realize just how wrong I was to judge someone based on their appearance or social status. I deeply regret my actions." Charlotte's bright blue eyes looked at Benjamin with sincerity, her heart yearning for forgiveness. In that moment, she was no longer the arrogant star she once was, but simply a young girl maturing, learning to face her mistakes and seeking forgiveness from the person she had once deeply hurt. Benjamin looked at Charlotte with kindness, smiling gently and responding to her with a voice full of compassion and tenderness. "Charlotte, I have never held anything against you. I know that we all make mistakes, and what matters most is not the mistakes themselves, but how we learn and grow from them. And today you have shown everyone, especially yourself, that you've learned this invaluable lesson." Hearing his gentle words of forgiveness, Charlotte felt lighter than she ever had before. Her eyes, once again, blurred with emotion. She knew that this moment would remain etched in her heart forever, as the most beautiful moment of her life, the moment she received true forgiveness and understanding from the man she had once looked down upon and insulted. Benjamin continued, his voice still gentle but strong and full of understanding. "I heard every note you played today, Charlotte. It was no longer the music of a young girl seeking perfection in technique, but music that was true and moving, created from a heart full of love, empathy, and humility. I am so proud of you." The sincere and gentle praise from Benjamin made Charlotte feel as though her heart was melting. For the first time in her life, she truly felt she had grown, not in the glare of fame or the admiration of others, but in sincerity and humility, things she had never experienced before. Charlotte gently nodded, her eyes now shining with true determination and confidence. I promise you, Mr. Ellison, from now on, I will never again judge others based on appearance or social status. I will always remember the lesson you taught me today, and I will strive to live with sincerity and empathy for everyone around me, just as you have. Benjamin smiled kindly, his eyes filled with satisfaction and trust. He gently placed his aged hand on Charlotte's shoulder, his voice warm but full of deep meaning. I believe you will do this, Charlotte, because today you have truly matured. Remember, life will always have its challenges and mistakes, but it is these things that help us grow, appreciate, and love more deeply. Charlotte looked into Benjamin's deep eyes, and she understood that his words were not just advice, but a guiding compass for her path forward. A path that would no longer be about pursuing superficial values, but one defined by sincerity, kindness, and a profound understanding of others. Thank you, Mr. Ellison, Charlotte said softly, her voice sincere and gentle. I will always remember what you taught me. This is certainly the most valuable lesson of my life. Benjamin nodded gently, his kind smile still on his lips. The two of them stood there in the quiet, small space backstage, but in this moment it held a meaning far greater than any stage could offer. A moment of reconciliation, growth, and genuine human connection. At that moment, Charlotte was no longer the arrogant musical prodigy she once was. She had truly become a mature individual, someone who knew how to live with a sincere heart, to listen, and to empathize. And the person who helped her make that change was none other than Benjamin Davis Ellison, the elderly artist with a noble, forgiving heart, who had just given her the most important lesson a person could ever receive in life. After that meaningful moment of reconciliation and growth, Benjamin gently patted Charlotte's shoulder one last time. His eyes still held the trust and tenderness of a father passing on his hopes to his daughter. He slowly let go, then turned away, walking silently into the darkness of the hallway behind the stage. Charlotte stood there, motionless, watching his figure fade away. A strange sense of emptiness rose within her. She suddenly realized that this might be the last time she would see Benjamin, the elderly janitor she had once looked down upon, but now had become the most important teacher in her life. A simple man with a great soul, who had left her and everyone present today with a profound and valuable lesson about kindness, humility, and the true worth of a person. Charlotte understood that from now on, every time she touched the piano keys, she would always remember Benjamin, his kind eyes, his warm smile, and the sincere lessons he had passed on to her. His words were not just lessons in music, but priceless lessons about life and how to be a better person, lessons that she knew she would cherish and honor forever. As Charlotte stood there, still lost in her deep thoughts, her former friends, those who had once stood by her in her arrogance, approached her. This time, their gazes were no longer filled with pride or disdain, but with regret and sincerity. One of them softly spoke, "Charlotte, we're really sorry for everything. We've learned so much from Mr. Ellison and from you. Thank you for helping us realize the mistakes we made before." Charlotte turned around and smiled gently. She didn't blame her friends, for she had made similar mistakes herself. She softly responded, "We all make mistakes. What matters now is that we live and play music with sincere hearts, just like Mr. Ellison taught us." They all nodded in unison, and in their eyes, a deep awakening could be seen. This was the last and most important lesson that Benjamin had left before quietly departing. In the distance, Benjamin's figure had completely disappeared, and no one knew where he was headed, but everyone understood that he would never truly leave them. Though he had appeared for just a brief moment, Benjamin had made an unforgettable impression on each person. Through his music, his poignant life story full of suffering yet full of compassion, and most importantly, through his rare humility and kindness. In the days following that unforgettable concert, Charlotte returned to her daily life, but she was no longer the Charlotte Whitmore she once was. In every note she played, in every action and word she spoke, Charlotte kept Benjamin's image in her heart as a beacon of light, reminding her always to live sincerely and empathize with those around her. Whenever she entered the Grand Charleston Theater, Charlotte would unconsciously look around, hoping to see the familiar figure of the elderly janitor. But Benjamin never appeared again. He had chosen to leave quietly, humbly, just as he had lived his life, without fame, without praise, simply hoping to leave something truly meaningful in the hearts of others. Charlotte understood that even though Benjamin was no longer physically present, the legacy he left behind would live on forever in the hearts of those he touched. It wasn't about fame or personal glory, but about the genuine, profound lessons of love, humility, and the true worth of a person. In her private room every evening, Charlotte still looked at the small photo she had hung on the wall, a picture that unknowingly captured the moment when Benjamin was playing the piano on stage that night. His eyes at that moment radiated a deep emotion, and his hands glided gently over the keys with absolute sincerity. Charlotte whispered to herself, as though he were there and could hear her, "Thank you, Mr. Ellison, for everything you taught me. I will never forget you, and I will always carry this valuable lesson in my heart." And so, time passed, but the story of Benjamin Davis Ellison, the great artist behind the humble figure of an elderly janitor, continued to be told with great respect and emotion in the Charleston community. Those who had witnessed that day's story continued to pass it along, sharing the profound lesson he had left behind, like a simple yet powerful reminder of kindness, humility, and the true value of every human being. Charlotte had grown now, becoming a true piano artist, but she always knew that the most valuable thing she had ever received wasn't her piano skills or fame. It was the profound lesson from that great and humble old man from years ago. For he had taught her the most important thing about music and life, that it is the sincere love and compassion for everyone that matters the most. Benjamin Davis Ellison had quietly left, but he would forever leave a deep mark in Charlotte's heart and in everyone's, as an unspoken song that would always echo in their hearts. And Charlotte knew that this lesson would stay with her for the rest of her life, so that every time she touched the piano keys, she would remember him, the elderly janitor who had taught her the true meaning of music, kindness, and humility in life. The touching story of the elderly janitor Benjamin Davis Ellison and Charlotte Whitmore's meaningful journey of awakening not only resonated through music, but also helped us recognize the true values in life. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the simplest of people, don't they? What about you? Have you ever met someone who seemed ordinary but changed your life forever? Share that unforgettable story in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread these beautiful messages to more people. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.